Yeah. 2 weeks ago, Micah spoke on Matthew 13, 2 through 23, the parable of the sower. And the seed was the word of Yahweh, or is the word of Yahweh. And the parable was about the types of ground that the seed can fall onto. And then last week, Tony spoke on identity crisis. And basically being confused because of the doctrines of men. So my message is I'm going to take both of those and put a different twist on it, but it's kind of a combination of the two. So if you continued in Matthew 13 where Micah was at, then it's like the whole chapter is about sowing, different kinds of sowing. So the next parable there is called the parable of the weeds. And if you are King James, it's wheat and tares. And so in that parable, it talks about seed also, but it talks about a man sowing good seed. Now in the parable that Micah used, it didn't say good seed, it just said seed. So I'm trying to make good seed be the format here. So since Matthew's the parable of the wheat and tares, the man sowed good seed, and the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man, which was Yahshua. So even though it didn't say good seed in the first parable that Micah used, the seed, anything that Yahshua sows is good. So it's good seed. So if good seed is the word of Yahweh, then I want to talk about words. And we know that words are powerful. As I was doing this and getting it together, I was thinking of that commercial. Remember that commercial that was words hit as hard as a fist? And it was a commercial about verbal abuse. We would show kids and the verbal abuse, and the end would be words hit as hard as a fist. So words affect our image. With the women's meeting, they covered 2 weeks on the way you think of yourself. Your self-esteem, your image that you have for yourself. And a lot of that is developed by way of, in your youth, was you're stupid, you'll never amount to anything. And these words were seeds that were planted into their lives. And so they grew. And now they respond on the crop that they're harvesting of these seeds. But it's not always necessarily about us, and our self-image. Sometimes I remember when I have tunnel vision, and not physically, mentally I have tunnel vision. So I have to I don't see the whole thing. So I really have to focus and work real hard to see the whole thing. That's why I do not like to drive. It's much a chore for me to drive because I don't see the whole. I have to work really hard to do it. It's not leisure, it's work. And so I don't like to drive. I can do it, but it's a chore. But it's like that in everything mentally. I'm visually in my physicalness, I can see the whole thing. I just can't, mentally. So I'm like that. So we're in a training room. I'm starting my job. We're in a training room. And, after a few weeks, people are getting to know each other and different things. Then you go to lunch, and people say, do you see how they do this and how they do that? And I'm thinking, what are they talking about? I didn't see any of that. Well, now the seed has been planted. I go back into that training room, and it's always in my face. It's all I see. And I don't like it. And I tell the people at lunch without to go to lunch, I don't want to talk about this stuff no more. Don't tell me stuff. But these were, I totally oblivious until somebody spoke a word, and then it went in, and bam. That was some instant growth, but their words are powerful. So here, for this message, I want to equate word with doctrine and or teaching, because that's what doctrine is. The doctrine of Yah is good seed. No matter what he sows, good. All his word is good. Even Hezekiah, with getting judgment, could say, good is the word of Yahweh. Even Yahweh, though Yahweh was sentencing his household to be cut off, he was able to say, good is the word of Yahweh. Because everything that proceeds from Yahweh is good. Now, the doctrine of men, bad seeds, or weeds. Are you cultivating a weed? Some time ago, Darlene stood up, and I have no idea about what her message was, what her testimony was, except for that one part about that plant that started growing in her pot outside of her house. And she saw that plant growing, and she thought she would just help it along. And she would water it, and she took care of it. And then when it grew enough, she realized it was a weed. She was taking care of a weed. Now, from the moment she said that, all them years ago, have to be at least 5 years ago, I was like, that is a message. That is a message. And so now, Yahweh gave it to me. So to cultivate means to grow from seed, bulbs, shoots, etc. Now, Sister Eleanor is our gardener. Tony has tampered a little in gardening, and so they'll understand maybe more than some of us. It also means to improve or develop plants by various horticultural techniques. And horticultural, for those of you who don't know, is the study of plants, farming, gardening, how to do it, best soils, best kinds of what grows what and what, the study of growing things. So cultivating is to improve or develop these plants by using various techniques. To promote the development or growth of. To seek to develop a familiarity with, give one's attention to, or pursue. A weed, here's a definition. Now, all these sites really had trouble giving definition to what a weed is. So here's the definition of a weed. A weed is any plant which interferes with the management objectives for a given area at any given point of time. You need to hear that again? A weed is any plant which interferes with the management objectives for a given area, land or water, at any given point of time. So if you have a space in the yard that you're going to designate for your garden, you're going to grow some tomatoes. So that space is set aside for your tomatoes. And you dig it up and you do what you have to. You plant any weed, anything other that comes into that space and messes with your garden is a weed. Any plant. Because it's messing with the objective that the management that what you've set aside that space for. So that's all temporal. You know, putting it with us, this garden isn't into Yahweh's hands for a short space of time. It's permanent. So he's going to garden it permanently. It has his management. You know, if you read John, he says, Yahweh is the husbandman. He's the horticulturist. He's the gardener. So this is his vineyard, his field that he's going to plant in, and it's for a permanent point in time. It's not, we ought not to be at least, yielding it over to him for just a space. Matthew 15:17 through 19 says, You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, This people draw nigh unto me with their mouth, and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrine the commandments of men. Some translations say the traditions of men, all the same thing. So they sow weeds as though it was good seed. Now I've given you the definition of weeds as any plant which interferes with. The problem is differentiating, and I spelled it correctly on the first try, between good seed and weeds. So I'm on the internet, I got to look out about weeds, right? So I find there are multiple sites, depending on the area that you live, that have weed alerts. Different, areas of the country, weed alerts. And they'll give you, most of them give pictures, some don't give pictures, but most of them give a picture, and they'll tell you, if depending on the area and the county you're in, if it's a class A, B, or C, noxious weed, which means hazardous, tells you, if it's just being guarded or if it's forbidden, or all this right there on the internet. It's amazing. And I'm like, wow, weeds really can cause some problems. So then most of these weeds start out as ornamental because they're pretty. So let's start with my weed I'm going to talk about. This is a weed. Can y'all see my weed? Now, it looks like a flower. It's lovely. This is what's up with my weed. This aggressive invader from Europe is also known, and it was just coincidental, as the devil's paintbrush. It outcompetes many native species by forming dense stands or competes with forest understory plants. As a Class B noxious weed, its control is required in King County. Now, I was in the state of Washington. This is from the state of Washington. So King County says this needs to be controlled. Now, another site that I had to give me a little bit more information on this particular one, since this was my one of choice. It's widely grown as an ornamental plant in gardens for its very decorative flowers. It has been introduced as in Australia and North America, where it is considered an invasive species in some areas. It is found across Canada and the north of the U.S., reaching more in the south on the coast. The plant is easily removed until it seeds back. So if you get it before it seeds, you can get it. But if you don't, it's trouble. It is on the noxious weeds, which means hazardous, and or quarantine list of Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and regions of British Columbia, with cultivation usually prohibited. In Alberta, it is not considered a noxious weed except locally. In Australia, the plant is considered a noxious weed. In Tasmania, it is quarantined from the country. In New Zealand, the plant is closely watched and attempts at control are made. It's a weed. Now I have others, but these pictures are smaller, but you could see they're all pretty weeds. I went for pretty weeds. Ugly weeds, we usually spot pretty readily. We go to the garden and pluck the thing up. But there are some weeds that I thought were flowers, but they classify them as weeds because of the way they overtake. They usually seed multiple times in a season. I wish my flowers were weeds. I can't get them things to, do too much of nothing. It's like I might have to get some of these and stick in the yard and overtake. Now this one here, I don't know if y'all can see that little picture, but it's the daisies. You know, the daisies growing on that little vine. I like them. This Class B noxious weed is widespread in western Washington. Control is recommended but not required in King County. Commonly considered an ornamental, this perennial herb, which means it keeps growing on its own, is also a serious weed in 40 countries. This species escapes to roadsides and spreads to pastures, rangelands, croplands. See, it invades areas that are specified for certain functions. That's why it's considered a weed. It is not readily grazed by cattle, but if eaten, it gives milk an off flavor. Weeds. Are you cultivating a weed? Most of these weeds start out as ornamental because they're pretty. Some are in those multi-seed packs. Because I've read on some other ones, and those multi-seed packs, wherever, if you got one of those kinds of seeds that are in that multi-seed pack, they don't sell them in those counties, states, whatever. The packs that have all the variety of flowers, and like it's a good way, easy way to start a flower bed. You just get one of them multi-packs and throw it out there, and you got multiple kinds of flowers. The problem with weeds are they reduce crop yields by depriving the crop of the water, light, and soil nutrients they need. Weeds may also produce allergic substances that are toxic to crop plants. The work of controlling weeds in crops and pastures increases production cost. If weeds are present at crop maturity, they may cause harvesting problems. Control is difficult. The seeds of many weeds remain dormant in the soil for years and then germinate when conditions are favorable. Some weeds have extensive root systems and underground stems that help the weed to spread and persist. Perennial weeds store reserve foods in their root systems and continue to sprout again and again after the tops are destroyed. You know one of those, don't you? It's called a dandelion. These characteristics of weeds make control a problem. So let's talk about, first of all, just from the couple pictures, they look like flowers. They're very pretty. Even though people consider them as weeds, because they're decorative, people plant them. The dandelion thing, how many moms haven't got a handful of dandelions because your child done picked you some flowers? And they brought you in a handful of dandelions. They had no clue they were weeds. They were flowers. They looked pretty to them. Or people who try to keep their yard got one dandelion. There goes the seeds. Mow it up. It's coming back. It doesn't matter. It's coming back until it seeds and dies on its own. Needless to say, I think y'all know where I'm going with this, right? Weeds. These seeds that we allow to be planted in us. Yahshua is going out and he is planting seeds. But so is the enemy, so is our culture, so are we. We're getting seeds from everywhere. We need to learn how to tend a garden and recognize a weed. And then I was trying to think of some of the doctrines I could be, because I want to equate this with doctrines, teachings, false teachings that are out there. We recognize the weeds, the ones that aren't attractive. You can talk about Buddhism all you want to me. I see that weed 10 miles away. Or Hinduism. I'm not buying into that. But the weeds that we have problems with are the ones that look like they could be good. And it's not always about sin either. I mean, some of there are little traditions. And I'll use Denise's, because she's the only one. She's trying to infect the rest, but for Black Friday. There's nothing wrong with Black Friday. There's nothing wrong with Denise getting up early and going shopping and trying to catch a deal the day after Thanksgiving. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that should hinder her in some other place as far as her work to Yahweh, if it should, that seed that's in her, because she's already been talking about it. See, that's a full plan already in bloom. And it takes over space and starts crowding out some good seed, her weed got to go. She got to dig that. It's no longer ornamental. It's no longer just a decoration. It's killing other things. So, and that could be just with any nice, like I said, it doesn't have to be sin per se. It's the way we think, the seeds that have affected us, things that we think, oh, well, this is okay. But what is it doing to the rest of the crop is what we have to be looking at. Like it said, these weeds, they're part of people's gardens. They purposely plant these things. So they're not you don't purposely plant a weed. But because they get, the next thing, like Sister Eleanor said, well, your neighbor lets you know about it. That thing, you don't keep it trimmed and keep it coming back. It's take over your yard, the neighbor's yard, down the street. The daisy things going out into the road. The thing about weeds is they don't need too much soil. They don't need too much soil. I've seen trees beginning to shoot up on roofs because it got some dirt up there in the downspouts and a seed from a tree drop down there, and the tree will start growing. Now, it don't last long because the tree got a root. But it starts to grow. It don't take a lot of soil. So it don't have to, and the thing about us, remember, I'm talking to the folks that know Yahshua. This good ground, been dug up, the rocks have been picked all out. We talking about some good ground. What weed is not going to grow there? If it hits there, it's going to grow. So we have to learn, even if it looks pretty. Wow, that's really pretty. I think I'll let it stay. And then as I see the flowers I like are beginning to die because this weed, here's some other stuff that you might not know. It might not look like it's overtaking it on the top, but underground, it's strangling the roots of the other plants and killing them off underground where you don't even see, because they have that type of rooting system. They're trying to survive. Prosperity message. Tony said a couple weeks ago, and I agree with him, I believe in a prosperity message. Yahweh said that I'm the head, not the tail. Sounds prosperous to me. Denise gave her testimony. Sounds prosperous to me. Ornamental, though, wouldn't you say? It's a benefit of being in the household of faith. But somehow that weed done took root and it's killing all this other stuff. And it's now the main thing in the garden. And it's like, it's all about prosperity. How did that happen? Because it was a weed planted on good ground. Grace. Grace is a very good thing. But I think there's a hybrid plant out there called grace. And it's trying to take over too. It looks just like grace. But it's telling me that it's okay to do whatever you want. Doesn't sound like the grace from the Bible. What kind of seed is that? Must be a weed. Can't be good seed. I heard Pastor Paul this week. He's talking about money. Good message. But he made a statement about grace. Because, tithing is not a nice topic. People don't like to hear that topic. I'll come back when you're done preaching about tithing. You know, he made all the jokes, you know, because he knows where it's at. People don't like that topic. We're in the dispensation of grace, and it's grace giving. And he asked a question that stuck in my head, and I'm going to remember it for a long time. He said, why is it that we think living in grace means we don't have to do as much as our counterparts in the Old Testament? They had to do it, but we think we don't have to. If we're in grace, we should be doing more than what they did. And I was like, that is the truth. If Yahshua did all of that for me, why am I going to now want to be out of having to do anything? Recognizing the weed. It looks good. I mean, prosperity message sounds great. It's beautiful. It looks good. It really looks good. The grace, the dispensation of grace that I can do whatever I want. Once saved, I'm saved. Man, that is good. Isn't it? Tony's pet peeve, the new covenant. He kind of brought it up last week. He said, they don't even know what the new covenant is. That weed got in there, talking about this new covenant. You know, like the old covenant is done away with instead of revised, or a continuation, or the light has really shined on it. We can see the fine print better than we ever have before. Why would you want any other covenant? Weeds. Weeds. Well, it's just as though we're married. We've been living together 15 years. It's just as though we're married. Weed. It's a weed. I don't care how you rationalize it. It's a weed, and it's taking over the garden. Those kinds of thoughts, not just doctrinal, but even in ourselves, where we rationalize out something, where we listen to somebody explain something in men's doctrine, and it made sense to us because it will. Understand, it will make perfect sense. It will be totally logical, or else we wouldn't buy it. But it makes sense. Oh, yes. Plant that. I like that. And the next thing I know, I've got this thing I didn't know it was a weed. And it's coming up. It's looking good. But what is it doing? What's making it a weed? You got to keep in mind the definition of the weed. It's interfering. It's interfering with Yahweh's management of this place that I've given to him. It's interfering. It's causing me confusion, or it's causing me not to step into the place I need to be in. Or, you know, we've discussed today about how the people who want to throw away the law say we're under grace now. And because they can't see the grace in the law. It's there. Yahweh's always been about grace. Because if he wasn't, nobody'd be here. Nobody'd be here. He knew Adam and Eve would sin. That was about grace. When he made the first sacrifice and clothed them, it was all about grace. It didn't even come on the scene when it was, you know, I always go back to Noah because it clearly says, and Noah found grace. Noah was saved by grace. What? Wait a minute. I'm saved by grace. Noah was saved by grace. There's only one way to get saved. By grace. Abraham, saved by grace. And his faith was righteousness to him. Sound the same. But anything else, some other plant, some other seed that somebody else will, you don't have to do that anymore. We're under grace. It's a weed. And if you take that and cultivate it. See, weeds are going to fall. They are going to fall, and they're going to grow because it's good ground. The object is to look at it and know it's a weed and get it out of there before it interferes. See, that's it. Weeds are going to come. There isn't any way not to avoid them. One of the definitions of cultivate was to improve or develop plants by various horticultural techniques, to promote the development or growth. False teachers. False teachers. Taking good care of that weed, watering it and fertilizing it and helping it grow and root. False teachers. So if you hear the seed, sit under somebody who's promoting that thing, it's definitely going to root. And you're not going to even know it. So I'm kind of like with Tony with this message, at first I thought, this is just for the household of faith. I'm like, no, it's not. Everybody's being planted. Seeds are flying everywhere, especially like this time of the year, naturally speaking, and going into the fall, the wind is blowing and the seeds is flying. You get stuff, it's like, what the heck? Those of us who listen to other programs, I am not banning that. Please continue to, but listen with a good ear. Watch for this, what kind of seeds it is that's being planted. If on that day it's not good seed, turn it off. Come back tomorrow or whenever that message is done. I promote listening to other people because we need to know what's going on out there. But you need to be able to recognize the seed. Now, I have gardened a little bit, and I am growing some flowers. But I really would say I know nothing. If you opened up and held some seeds out there, now a horticulturalist or somebody would say, oh, that's a seed for roses, and that's a seed for petunias, and it would know, by looking at the seed. I'm not that good. So sometimes I have to wait for it to grow. And then even sometimes then I'm not too good. Oh, I think that might be, I've seen them before, I think that might be a carnation. But I don't really know. I need somebody to come along and tell me. Now that's the purpose of teachers and stuff, to help you know what's growing here. To help you know whether you got a garden of weeds or if you're planting some good seed. Or maybe you got a mixture. You bought one of them multi-packs. And the multi-packs is a good variety. And so, like I said, for me, that is a good way to start a garden. I just throw them seeds out and let it all come up. But in some of those are plants that aren't good. Some of those will destroy the others. And I don't really follow the directions well. About, a quarter of an inch down, because I don't do well. There are certain seed that you don't scatter. It's expensive seed. And you dig that row and you put it in, each seed in by hand, because it's expensive. Are you cultivating any weeds? Paul talked about self-examination. And we always go there for Passover. Probably because Paul is using it around, he's talking about taking the wine and the bread. But he's not looking like we were brought up. You just did this one time a year. He's talking about communion, where these people were doing this more than once a year. And it's like you need to be examining yourself every time you do this. Self-examination. Let's look at the garden. How's it doing? Are there weeds growing in there? Are there some things that are ornamental, but you see they're kind of cropping over to some delicate seeds, plantings that are now growing, and it's beginning to be a problem? Or it doesn't look like there's any problem on the top, but these plants were doing quite well, but now they're dying. Maybe this one's killing them underneath. We got to look at the garden, examine it, see what's going on, what's growing there. Maybe there's some stuff, from your youth. There's a few people brought up in church. I know Inez, Sister Eleanor, I think Darn, Debbie, Micah. Been in church since before they was conceived. That's how long they've been in church. I wasn't in church like that. And maybe at one point, I can't even say that here, but I know LJ, she brought up Catholic, and then she Baptist, she married a Baptist. So experiencing even some different types of doctrinal faiths. Christian, but doctrinal differences. Those seeds were planted. And sometimes you think you're growing a nice garden and you've got a bunch of weeds. You have to go dig them up. One of the hazards that stuck out the most to me was the fact that you can let them grow together, especially those nice looking ones. They're not really doing any damage. I'll just let them go. When it's harvesting time, they cause problems. The idea is to get your garden to harvest. Yahshua said, Paul taught on it, you reap what you sow. It's a law. Period. You reap what is sown. However your garden, whatever's in that garden, whatever it is. Sometimes maybe it's attitude. Got some seed of bitterness. Isn't it interesting? Seed of bitterness. Right? And he talk about root and seed. Thing growing down in you. Maybe there's attitude problems. Not just, as I said, it's not just about doctrine, but, seeds that were planted in you, things that have been done, and you get angry, and you get, seeds of anger that lead to roots of bitterness. And all these things that are there, and they're all growing. And we think, it's a good thing. I'm justified in my anger. I'm justified having my attitude with that person because you just don't know what they did to me. And that goes to harvest with the rest of the seed. You're going to have problems with harvesting your good seed. I used to wonder why in my marriage it's like I plant good seed, I can't get a good crop. Yahweh, this is really frustrating because you said, and the problem was I had one field and it was a joint thing. And if the other party's coming in throwing in weeds in your garden, you might have planted good seed, but your yield is less. Oh, it's just now coming to me about that parable. Some 30, some 60, some 100. Some people got weeds growing in their garden, and their crops are not yielding. Their crops are not yielding because they got weeds, and it's choking out, so you're not getting the full potential of your garden. So we have to self-examine. We have to look at the weeds, recognize them. Like I showed you my one. That's beautiful. I'd like to have that growing in my yard, I think. But it's beautiful. It's lovely to the eye. It's pleasing. It has a nice aroma. These are the seeds that will kill the seeds that Yahweh's planted. They will come in and they will overtake They will set you up in confusion. They will set you up in doubt. They will set you up. Please believe me, they're coming from everywhere, and they will grow. They will grow because this is good ground. And so now we have to learn how to recognize weeds. So, as with you all, I'm working at it. I use my natural lack of ability to know, oh boy, I got some work to do. But I'm better on the spiritual side than the natural, and I'll take that. That's more important to me. But I want to get to harvest, and I want to harvest 100-fold. You know, I always thought that parable was like, isn't Yahshua merciful? He'll take that 30, he'll take that 60. And he is, and he does. The scripture clearly says that. Some yield 30, some yield 60, some yield 100. But why should I be satisfied for 30 when this crop can yield 100? It's good seed. If I will keep the weeds out, I can get 100-fold. And that should be our goal. We should not satisfy for less. If we fall short, Yahweh's gracious. But our goal should be 100-fold. 100-fold. Prosperity.
Praise God.